If Washington wants to bounce back from the Ohio State loss, they're going to need a huge day from Demond Williams.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward, Mazda, Move and Be Moved. Just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, wherever that might be, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the channel out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a tremendous Friday show coming at all our everydayers out there today. We love doing these keys to the game prediction shows. So, as all the everydayers out there know, bold predictions and your score prediction coming at the end. Defensive keys getting there a little bit later on. But as always, we start on the offensive side of the ball. And if Washington wants to win this game, Demond Williams needs to show up and do what he's been doing all year, which is put together a big-time show.
I mean, we expect nothing less from Demond at this point. And even when you look at the Ohio State game, the way that he was able to methodically, still execute the offense with, it was 15 and 16, 14 and 15, somewhere in that range before he threw his second incompletion. Only had, I think, 4 at the end of the game, 4 or 5 total,
yeah, he
maybe.
completed 82% of his passes and completed 14 in a row.
But at one point, he was almost perfect. And I think part of that is obviously the script that Jedd Fisch gives Demond. But then a lot of it has been Demond taking those improvements from his freshman season, whether it's deciding to tuck it and run, hold on for a little bit longer. You just see the poise that he has in the pocket. He's not trying to run. I think that needs to be clear. But I think his legs might be the X factor, if you will, in this game, because he's going to have to at some point evade pressure with Maryland's edges. I mean, if I had to set the line for Demond rushing yards at the end of the game, 27.5 seems like a good number. I would certainly take the over, hammer the over, if you will, because I think he's going to have to get a little creative at times. But I would imagine Jedd, especially coming off the Ohio State game, going against Mike Loss, another offensive-minded coach, Jedd's going to want to prove himself. It's not going to be the Apple Cup where you're trying to get the most points in a road game in Big Ten history or something like that. But I do think Jedd's going to give Demond the right script to work with.
So I feel like a lot of what's going to happen in this game certainly will come down to health, and we'll see if Carver Willis is able to suit up for this game. I look at it, and the reason that we needed to make sure we started with Demond is everything you were talking about, right? It is the dual threat ability. It's what he can do with his arms, with his legs. And I know one thing that Jedd talked about a little bit after the game on Saturday was that his high completion percentage is not always a positive thing, when you're taking sacks and hold on to the ball too long. And those are things he's still learning, but that's okay. That's a good thing. And then when you look at this Maryland defense, they're number 11 right now in total defense at 300.5 yards per game allowed. And this is against a schedule where they've got Townsend. They had FAU on their schedule. Wisconsin is probably, the juggernaut, if you will, in air quotes, because I've not been impressed with what they've been doing this season. And they're also allowing 208.3 yards per game through the air, which are also 11th in the Big Ten. So I look at this and I think that if Washington wants to find a way to reassert this explosive offense that has done such a good job all year leading up to the Ohio State game, and even we've seen a lot of Ohio State fans in the comments from our post-game show and everything saying they were really impressed with what this team was able to do, and you do have to take your hat off to what Ohio State was able to do defensively in that game as well. I think that so much of this is going to rely on Demond getting through progressions quickly. Just A, B, C, whatever it might be, and just making sure he's getting the ball out, because this Maryland duo of edge rushers, I've been really impressed with what they've been able to bring to the table as well, and Sidney Stewart and Zahir Mathis. But and those are two guys I've been watching very closely. But I just look at what Demond has been able to do since the day he stepped on campus. Not even his first start, but he's always been a very efficient passer. And I think that, whether it be Desmond Roebuck, Raiden Vinesbright, Omari Evans, Decker DeGraaf, spoiler alert for later, I got a bold prediction with him. All of those guys need to step up and help out Denzel Boston. I do believe that he is going to have a really solid game where maybe we see him get 6, 7, 8 targets, something like that early on, like in the first half. But I want to see what this passing attack as a whole is going to look like, because Jonah Coleman going into this game as your second leading receiver isn't necessarily what you're looking for from the offense, but I don't hate it because he's just so effective every time the ball is in his hands. But as this offense continues to take shape, one of these young guys is going to step up. I think we're going to see a bigger role for Omari Evans as he continues to prove that he's healthy and gets more ingrained in the offense. I just think that it all is going to start with Demond Williams in this game.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think kind of within that, when you talk about Maryland's duo of edge rushers, the key there is duo. It's not just one where you have the guy that's going against your left tackle and maybe every now and then test your right tackle when he's not winning against your A1 guy. Drew has a party. He's kind of your A1 guy in this game. Absolutely. And so I'm going to be curious to see who matches up and kind of how those tests go, because if Drew's able to hold up, I don't necessarily worry that much about who's the left tackle. Obviously, if Carver was able to go, that no doubt kind of squashes a lot of things. But if it's Max or John Mills or whoever you want to throw out there, that's where the game might get a little interesting. But we haven't seen Demond or even Jonah, for that matter, go to the left that much this season. If you look at Demond's breakdown in terms of where he scrambles out, it's rarely to the left. Jonah's touchdowns, almost non-existent to the left. And so it's not to slight those guys on the left side, because obviously
they've been excellent. John Mills has been tremendous, yeah.
Exactly. So it's Carver Willis in that respect. But in Max McCree in the second half against Ohio State. So I think no matter who ends up playing at left tackle among those trio of guys, I'm not concerned. It's just a matter of, how do you weather that test? Because like you mentioned, the number 3 receiver is Desmond Roebuck. Like in terms of total yardage or receptions and things like that, he's kind of that quiet veteran at this point where if you kind of put a blind comparison of A and B and you put Omari Evans and Desmond Roebuck's stats and you don't say who's who, I would have guessed that Omari has Desmond's stats, and then you kind of flip the other one around where, Desmond's certainly been good. But like, to me, I think if Omari is able to show out, that's great. But this might just be another, you saw the salute to Armed Services Night coming up for one of UW's home games that featured Desmond. It's like they're almost kind of selling him as one of the next faces alongside Demond, and whatever happens with Denzel after the season, who knows? But you just look at it and think, why not build that connection even more? That's no slight to Omari. It's just at some point you're going to lean into that relationship as well.
So I see where you're going. I just want to switch gears here and talk a little bit more about this rushing attack before we move on to the defensive side, because this is one of those things where Maryland has done a good job keeping teams out of the end zone this season and limiting teams on the ground. They're number 3 in the Big Ten in scoring defense, allowing 10.8 points per game, and number 7 in rushing defense, allowing 92.2. And I think that this is one of those things where, especially once you get down into the red zone, I don't want to see Jedd Fisch kind of get cute with some of these play calls, which we've seen him do in the past, where he's run some long developing routes and some different things where it does ask Demond Williams to hold on to the ball a little bit longer. Depending on what the offensive line situation looks like, you certainly aren't going to want him to do that. And Maryland has a bunch of really nice athletes in the front 7. I don't know if they're necessarily the most experienced athletes, but they certainly are really promising and have a bright future ahead of them. Like I really do think that Mathis and Stewart could be one of the best tandems of edge rushers in the Big Ten in a year or 2 years, like truly. But I look at what Washington brings to the table from a running game standpoint. And we talked about it on yesterday's show, as the everydayers know. Jonah Coleman got 13 carries against Ohio State. I don't think that's going to be the case in this game, because we've seen it all year long, where we've talked about it this week, that Washington is the fewest passing attempts in the Big Ten. And I think that the game plan might look a little bit different this week, depending, just like considering the matchup. But we know that Jedd Fisch wants to run the ball. He wants to get the ball into the hands of his best players, and that is Demond and Jonah on the ground as well. So if we see, UW get into inside the 20, I think that Jedd Fisch is certainly going to try to just line it up and run the ball downhill, because Washington has done that at such a high rate this season. And again, Maryland is not a bad team. I want to make that very, very clear, but they have not faced a test like Washington just yet. So I think that that's something where it's okay. We know that we can do this really well. We want to see you stop it. And if that's the game plan in short yardage situations, I would love that. And I think that it's one of those things that with Jedd, as he, continues to find himself as a play caller here at Washington with an improved unit in his second year, those are some of the things that when you go against these big time teams, when you go to Michigan in a few weeks, when Illinois comes to town the week after that, those are things you need to have right. And those are things that we need to see in this game. But Lars, with that being said, let's jump over to the defensive side of the ball. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Mazda. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, It's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward is Quentin Moore's punch out against Brandon Innes. That was a tremendous play at a big time for Washington. That game was really close in the first quarter, and as the Huskies continue to try to generate turnovers, doing that on special teams is what you absolutely love to see. And for Quentin Moore, who was playing the first game of his life with his daughter in the stands, that's a really, really cool moment for him. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. You've also got a message from our good friends over at DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you ordered, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Washington, it was Demond Williams who delivered in a big way. He was really, really efficient passing the ball. And as the offensive line broke down, yeah, he took a lot of sacks in that game, but Demond, against the number one defense in the country in Ohio State, he really lived up to the moment. When the pressure was on, he came through, no hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching week after week, this performance wasn't a fluke. Demond is on a streak. And just like Demond delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day, only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. Lars, as we jump over to the other side of the ball here, when you look at what Washington's defense needs to do, we're not going to talk about injuries with this one. We're just going to talk about what we know. And Tacario Davis is questionable. I just want to make sure that's out there right now. We're going to see what that looks like. But when you just look at what we know Washington is going to roll out on defense, your number one key is
don't let Maryland's weakness become their strength, because that's the run game, and that's the only way that I really see Maryland being able to hang around in this game. Where obviously, we talked about Malik Washington earlier this week, and he's nice. He's a nice freshman, good,
very
solid,
talented. Yeah.
Very, very talented player. But there's a lot of susceptibility there, both in terms of from when we talk about the drops that the receivers have had and the fact that he's a freshman. That's just a true part of this. Now, yeah, they're going to be at home in that, but you would think Washington's defense, Ryan Walters being a veteran Big Ten defensive coordinator, there should be a way where you're not just containing Malik Washington, you're putting pressure on Malik Washington. You're making his decision time speed up, and that's where you talk about whether it's tips and overthrows or whatever you want to call it. Spoiler alert for me, not total spoiler, but a hint at a spoiler for third segment there. But you think about what Ryan Walters is capable of doing with the blitz packages that he has. Julian Sayin is a very talented quarterback, and Ryan Day knows how to coach offenses almost better than anybody. Malik Washington and Mike Locksley aren't necessarily at that caliber yet. So when you talk about the pressures that Ohio State was able to kind of counter against Washington, I don't think that's going to be the case this weekend. So I'm curious to see what Ryan Walters dials up in that respect.
So I really like where you're going with that. But I want to use that same quote, what Ryan Walters dials up, but I'm more curious about what it's going to look like on the back end than it is on the front, because we talked about it a little bit earlier this week on where pressure could come from, and I think a lot of it is going to fall on the defensive tackles, the guys on the interior, Ontario Thompson, Bryce Butler, Linneas Davis, those kinds of guys, just really letting the pocket collapse from the interior and not, letting Malik Washington get an opportunity to step up and obviously bringing down the big physical quarterback that he is. I think that a lot of this is going to come down to the coverages. Like I said, I didn't want to get too much into injuries because it does certainly change the game plan, but, despite that, I need to talk about Dylan Robinson here for a moment, because this is one of those guys where, it's like we were just talking about with Ohio State. Like when he did get forced into that starting role, it was, okay, are you going to pick on him? And you go back and you watch the film, and Ryan Walters talked about it the other day. He did a really nice job of holding his own in that game and standing up to a just tremendous pair of receivers in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And I think if he is forced into a starting role again this weekend, I think no matter what, we're going to see him. Like if Tacario Davis plays or not, we're going to see some kind of Dylan Robinson, just snap share. And I'm very excited to see what that's going to look like, because you can go back and you see several plays where he jams whoever he's lined up against off the line of scrimmage and does a really nice job mirroring and matching. And Ryan Walters did mix up some of the coverages he threw at him on the back end, like our buddy Jake Butt talked about on the show last week, to try to confuse Julian Sayin. And they did a really good job of not allowing explosive plays and keeping everything in front of them. And I think that's going to be a big part of this, is with this Maryland offense, that's 14th in the Big Ten, just in terms of total offense, gaining 368.5 yards per game. I think that trying to keep things in front and limiting these explosive plays is important because maybe that's going to how they're going to want to try to attack you. But I look at Dylan, I look at Ephesians Prysock, I look at Rashawn Clark, who's going to be back in the nickel. And I think that those three guys, and, again, with or without Tacario Davis, I think that they give you a real great opportunity to win this game and create a couple of turnovers against a freshman quarterback who has done a really good job protecting the ball so far. But I think this is, just like we were saying on the other side of the ball, this is the biggest test that Malik Washington and this Maryland offense have seen so far through 4 games.
Yeah, it's almost a counter to Washington and Ohio State, where Ohio State was the biggest test Washington faced and it wasn't close. Now, we're not saying Washington represents Ohio State in this, and because Maryland and Washington, I don't think, the line says it alone. I think it's 6.5 still on FanDuel, but you look at it and think, okay, why is Washington almost a touchdown favorite on the road going 2 time zones east? Like, there's a reason for that, and I think it's 3 times. Man, do we really count the mountain time zone at this point? But no,
yes,
with all that being, no, you're absolutely right. With all that being said, there's a reason for that, and I think it's because of everything where, like Dylan Robinson, I think playing freshman, and there's a reason why Jedd Fisch does it. And as you were talking about it, I think it's Dylan Robinson's example of forcing that probably was against Washington State, I believe, where he's just playing free and fast, where you the older you get, maybe the more into the film you get, and you're kind of being more savvy and you're maybe playing more off ball. Dylan's just letting it rip. And I think that's to the benefit of Washington and Ryan Walters. And I think if he's able to go, you look at Maryland's receivers, obviously Shalik Knotts is their leading receiver at this point in time, right next to Denzel, I think right above Denzel Boston, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the Big Ten Conference. And so he's a guy where, he's a senior going into freshman, but he's a very unproven senior coming into the season. So when you look at Malik Washington, he's a great quarterback, but his weapons aren't exactly that consistent. And I think that, to your point about Dylan, is where Washington might have an advantage.
So that's exactly where I wanted to go with this, because I look at the back end of this defense and taking away Dylan Robinson, saying Tacario Davis in there. This is such an experienced secondary. Like there's so much to like, because you look at how much football Alex McLaughlin has played. Yeah, it's 4 games at the Big Ten level, but he was just on the field for every snap at Northern Arizona for his 2 seasons there. McEllisteen being a 5th-year senior. You look at what you're just getting as you kind of get down into linebacker roles as well. Jacob Manu, who looks like he's in line to start again. And you look at Devin Bryant, who has just been able to be really, really productive over the course of his first 4 games, or he was leading Washington in tackles until this last one when Alex McLaughlin goes out there and puts up 13. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, is I kind of expect a big game from Alex McLaughlin in the same right, where he was playing that box safety role closer to the line of scrimmage a whole bunch against Ohio State. And I fully expect to see that again, where he's just been so productive for Washington this entire season. I really do feel like, and this is something we've talked about all offseason long, as the Everydayers know, he is the kind of guy who can be an X factor for this defense all season long, because he just plays with his hair on fire. He's always around the football. He's always in the right position to make a play, whether it is against the pass or against the run. And he's a guy where I'm so curious to see how he's going to be utilized in this game, because one thing that Washington has done a whole lot on the back end, especially against Ohio State, is they went to a 3 safety look a lot. And they asked Rylon Dillard-Allen, another high-end freshman, to come in, and he played 43 snaps in that game. Like there's been just a lot of these freshmen that have stepped up, but have just combining that with the veteran presence that Washington already had, that we knew about coming into the season, has been a lot of fun to watch. And the way Ryan Walters has been able to scheme it up and put it all together is a lot of fun to see. And, going back to your point at the beginning, if you compare what we've seen from the secondary on the back end and combine that with a strong pass rush from whoever it is that's going to hit home in this game, that is a recipe for success on the defensive side of the ball.
I'm not going to lie, the Alex McLaughlin hair on fire line, great deep cut there. Great. You know exactly why. You know exactly why there. But absolutely, absolute flow. Well, head and shoulders above the rest, if you will. But with all that being said, I firmly agree with you. Like, I think Alex is, in the top 20. I could be wrong on that, but in terms of one of the best tacklers in terms of grading by PFF in the country. And it's about being in the right position. It's about, not necessarily playing catch up. It's about instincts, and it's about, the preparation that Ryan Walters gives these guys. And I just look and I think, like for like, you go down, if you do 3 or 4 matchups, I think I take Washington in every single one. And that's no disrespect to Maryland. It's just, You look at the veteran guys you have, whether it's the Ontario Thompsons inside or Tacario Davis potentially outside of the Fischens or Alex McLaughlin. Every box is checked, and it goes back to what Ryan Walters said at the start of the season. I don't think when Ryan said, I don't think I've had a defense this talented with this much depth across the board, and we've seen that show through.
No, I absolutely agree. And that's something that he's mentioned several different times. And as we just continue to look at how this defense is developing, I feel like before we move on, I just want to make sure I got this out there. I feel like UW and Maryland are on very similar tracks right now. Promising young quarterbacks, some promising young pieces on the defensive side of the ball as well, just in terms of building blocks, where obviously for Maryland, it's on the defensive line. Well, for the Huskies, it's on the back end mainly right now. I just think that this is going to be a really fun matchup in that regard as well. And Lars, with saying that, let's jump to some of these bold predictions. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with a brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. I love how the Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps, suggests the right weights, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. The swivel screen is a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat. And the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. All right, I've officially forgotten who's supposed to go first, which is, a shocker to anybody, any everydayer out there who's been listening to these for a couple of years now. I think it's your turn, so I'm gonna pass it over to you.
I was gonna be generous, and since I didn't give you a shout out on your birthday, shout out to you by the way this week.
Thank you.
Well done. I was gonna give it to you if you want, so I will.
Take it.
Okay. So with that being said, thank you, appreciate that. But when we talk about going back to the last segment with bringing pressure. Jacob Lane has 2.5 sacks his entire career. They have all come this season.
Sure.
Why not? First Big Ten road game, Jacob Lane seems to be the most consistent defensive lineman UW has this season. That's no slight to anybody. That's just when you look at production and impact. Why not double it this weekend? So I have Jacob Lane having 2 sacks and 3 total tackles for loss. He does have more than 3 TFLs in his career, mind you. But again, his career high is 2 in a game. So again, you've got a career game for Jacob Lane upcoming.
So as we all know, these are our bold predictions here. And I love where you're going with this because this is exactly what we have been talking about all week and really all season, because outside of Zach Durfee, who was tremendous against Washington State before going down against Ohio State, Washington had been looking for that second edge rusher to step up, and all season it had been Jacob Lane. He's had a really, really nice start to this year, both as a pass rusher and as an edge-setting run defender, and this is certainly one of those games where if you are able to play really nice coverage on the back end and make Malik Washington hold the ball for an extra 2 ticks, all of a sudden he can hit home, and you were getting that production that you're looking for off the edge. And, if Isaiah Ward or one of these D tackles are able to also help you get after the quarterback, the sack numbers could look really, really nice for you at the end of the day. So if you want to start on the defensive side, hey, I'm all about that. So I know a Locked On Huskies tradition here is first touchdown. I'm not going that route this week, but I wanted to talk about somebody who I think could have their first interception in this game. And I'm going with Rylon Dillard-Allen. This is somebody who we've been really excited about since the day he committed. He's just such a talented player. He's got the range to be a true center fielder. And then when you watch him on the field, he's scrappy. He's physical. He's a little undersized right now, as Ryan Walters told us, but he does not lack for heart or hustle or just any of that moxie at all, which is so much fun to watch on the field. And this is one of those games where, depending what the linebacker rotation looks like, where we've seen Washington tend to take a linebacker off to put an extra defensive back out there, usually a safety at this point in time, to make it a nickel look or a dime look or something like that, which has been a lot of fun to see on the back end, especially when you're sitting up high like we are in the press box and get to watch some of these things unfold. But for Rylon, this is an opportunity that I think he can really take advantage of, where Maryland just throws the ball all over the yard. So there are going to be opportunities for you to take advantage of these balls. As you said the other day, Maryland has 14 drops this season. So whether it be off a ricochet or some of these other different plays, I think that Rylon is someone who, a lot like Alex McLaughlin, We saw it throughout spring camp, throughout fall camp. He's one of those guys that can be in the right place at the right time a lot. And I think we're going to see that on Saturday with his first career interception.
See, I love where you're going with that because I don't have any necessary corrections or notes other than I would say first career turnover because I think it might be a forced fumble. And I think the reason why I say that is because when we talk about the pressure, that might be another way Ryan Walters gets a little creative. But I do absolutely agree that RDA is going to have an impact in this game, which leads me to my second point. And you look at guys that need to make an impact, guys that have slowly become household names, especially at Washington in the Seattle area, but just gradually in the Big Ten. The name that I mentioned earlier was Denzel Boston. Ohio State held him to his worst game since the Sun Bowl / the Oregon game last year. Neither game great.
Which is, it's worth noting that he also did have to leave the Sun Bowl early with an injury.
Exactly. Good point there. But also, that's why I threw in the Oregon game as well, because they were back-to-back career bad games. Denzel, as Jimmy Doherty pointed out this week, isn't really a guy that when he has one bad game, and again, last week was no fault of his own when you're going against Ohio State's defense. That was a really good scheme that he had, playing against him, so you can't really fault him there. Maryland's secondary, John J. Joyner and a few others that are in that secondary, good pieces. Absolutely good pieces. But if you're going head-to-head who has the better secondary, it's Washington. Denzel's gone against the secondary in practice every day, and I think it's going to make him have his fourth career 100-yard game. Worth noting, UW has had two of those games on the road, at Rutgers and at Wazoo. So I think you look at it and say he's had 2 touchdowns in every game. So I'm going to say 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think Denzel being on track gets back to the original point of Damon being on track and on schedule and having a successful day. And maybe one that we'll get to a little later on. But just if Denzel has a good game, that means UW is going to win the game.
So we don't, for all the everydayers out there, we don't prep these before. I just say, I have something on this, and you say, I have something on that. We like reacting to these live. And I love this because I also have a pass catching one that I wanted to go with, but I wanted to talk about whoever this number 2 target for Damon Williams is going to be. And this week, I really love the matchup of Decker DeGraaf against these Maryland linebackers and safeties and whoever they might ask to cover them. I think they have some good athletes there, but I just love the way that Jedd Fisch has been able to scheme up tight ends. And when you go back and you watch the film from the Ohio State game, there are a couple of plays where Damon Williams had Decker DeGraaf. I know there's one over the middle where he held the ball a little bit too long and took a sack. It would have been 10, 15-yard gain, somewhere in that ballpark. I think Damon Williams wants to right that wrong this week and get Decker DeGraaf involved early. So I love where you're going with that, and I think that Denzel certainly should be in line for a lot of targets, as we've said throughout the week. But I wanted to talk about Decker because you need to find one of these other guys to emerge. That is so important as the season goes on, as the schedule gets a little bit tougher, and we see some of these high-end Big Ten defenses, the Michigans, the Illinois, Oregon at the end of the season, obviously being another one. I have Decker DeGraaf in this game, 5 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. I'm so excited about him as a whole, and I think this is one of those games where you can certainly take advantage of some matchup things where we know that Jedd Fisch likes to run 12 personnel, especially in, run play action with Quentin Moore, as he said, one of the best blocking tight ends who's been around in college football. And that's when Decker has been at his best in terms of just finding different ways to leak out of the backfield and get upfield and use his athleticism to his advantage. So 5 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown.
I love that, and this is honestly a great time to mention it. Just the counter in that, one of the matchups that I'm really looking forward to in this game is Daniel Wingate against UW's kind of just receivers / second, third options, if you will. We're talking about Maryland's linebacker here, a guy that in his third year at Maryland, he's having an arguably his career year, but it's a very small sample size. He played under 300 snaps last season, still at that number relatively this season. This is his biggest game by far. I think in terms of a test for Maryland, this is going to be their biggest test, as we've been saying. So I absolutely like that. And the one thing that Washington does that Maryland literally straight up does not do, run the ball. This gets back to the tried and true non-Jimmy Lake tradition of establish Jonah Coleman, establish Adam Muhammad. Maryland has 4 rushing touchdowns total this season between Malik Washington and the 2 main running backs. Jonah Coleman at one point led the country with 9. Still, I think he's at, what do you have, 10? No, 10 total, 9 rushing.
10 total, yeah.
Yeah. I think Jonah adds 3 more to that total this week, gets a 125-yard game after being held below, I want to say, 80 yards last week. Safe bet there. gets back on track. The offense kind of rights the wrong. In a way, you're kind of righting the wrongs of 2024. You went winless on the road, start the season 2-0 on the road.
So I see where you're going with there. I want to talk about Washington's other star in the backfield, and that's Demond Williams, because we opened this show with talking about how important he is to this game. We have to close the show with talking about how important he is to this game. So I love the way this all worked out. I think that this is one of those games where Demond proves to the country what kind of playmaker he can be. And obviously we didn't see that to his full potential against Ohio State. We did see him put together a tremendous game against Washington State a few weeks ago. And I think that we're going to see another 300-yard game from him. I have him at 300 passing yards and 4 total touchdowns. So the way the math works out here is great, with, Decker getting 1, Jonah with a receiving touchdown, as you were just talking about, and 1 for Denzel Boston as well. Or did you have 2 for Denzel?
I think I have 1 or 2. So for your math, we'll go with 1.
So tremendous math here. Doing a great job there, because I had 4 total touchdowns if he wants to add 1 on the ground. I know that, this is all adding up to big numbers here at the end of the day for Washington, but that's what this offense has shown it can be against just lesser competition in the non-conference schedule. And after going against Ohio State, I really do feel like that I don't want to say it's a revenge factor here, but there is a bit of a bounce back involved with this, where Washington knows how its offense can operate and how explosive it can be at different points this season. I know I talked about it after the Wazoo game. They averaged 18.6 yards per completion in this game. And I think that Washington and Jedd Fisch and Demond and all these guys are going to be motivated to try to push the ball downfield and get back on track, especially going on the road into a hostile environment, spanning the entire country in 3 time zones to get there. And this could all result in a really big day for Demond Williams as the Huskies move to get back on track and get to 4-1. And with that being said, Lars, I'm going to do this now so we don't forget about it. It's time for your score prediction.
So surprising, I never do this. I'm not predicting UW loss, because obviously I just kind of gave it away there with what I just said previously, which was UW winning the game. But I do think Maryland covers the 6.5 on FanDuel. Shout out.
Okay.
Because I don't trust UW to blow anybody out that's not UC Davis or Wazoo, which is arguably at this point the same level. You think about, you're on the road at Maryland. College Park is beautiful, by the way. Maryland campus is incredible. If you ever get a chance to go out there, it's a really nice campus. Great J school too. But you look at it and think there's enough pieces that Washington has, but I keep having the flashback of the Rutgers game, as we've been going throughout the show. The Rutgers game was just screaming kind of in my ear last year. I think they right that wrong, but it's not going to be as easy as it probably should be. And I still think Demond comes away, with his streak intact. We'll leave it at that. But sure. With that being said, I think Washington wins the game 24-20. Demond gets a couple of touchdowns. UW probably has over 450 yards of offense, but it doesn't look as clean as it should.
Or speaking of College Park being beautiful, shout out to my dad's good friend, Kat, a Maryland alum, and she's really bummed she couldn't make it down for that game. But with that being said, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day, so please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after the game.